Well, Kamala Harris just became a senator from California. Seems like about 20 minutes ago. Already she's running for president. The cycle gets shorter every year, and she's fighting hard to stake a claim as the party's top left candidate. On health care, Harris is backing Medicare for all, for example.
I actually feel very strongly about this, is that we need to have Medicare for all. That's just the bottom line. Access to health care it should not be thought of as a privilege. It should be understood to be a right.
All right. Okay. That's a case you could make. But here's the interesting part. Harris also opposes a border wall and has denounced ICE, the border enforcement agents, the government workers, as a modern-day KKK. Watch.
The Klan was what we would call today a domestic terrorist group.
Why? Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and force?
It was based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
So Senator Harris does not want to vigorously enforce American immigration law. So how does that work? Think about it for just 1 second. Harris argues, and many Democrats agree with her, that free medical care for everyone who lives here is a human right. It's mandatory. Government has to provide it. But if you don't control immigration into the country, why wouldn't half the planet move to the United States to get free MRIs, et cetera? Why is it the middle class's burden in the United States to finance a welfare state for the rest of the planet? Jonathan Harris is a Democratic political commentator. He seems like a good man to ask. He joins us tonight. Mr. Harris, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So this seems to me the fundamental tension in the position that the left is taking basically universally right now, that we need to radically expand the welfare state. A lot of support for that. Medicaid for all, Medicare for all, and universal pre-care, pre-kindergarten, et cetera. Overwhelming majority of Democrats support it. A lot of Republicans support it. How can you pay for those programs if you don't close the borders?
Well, I mean, there's various ways you can pay for it. You can increase taxes. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants a 70% tax over 10 million. When you make over 10 million, everything after that, not your entire income. You can raise taxes, you can cut spending other places. But I think when you have, our military budget is what, 716 billion, almost $1 trillion, I think.
Sure.
If you can allot that much money to send your military all over the world, but you can't to take care of the health of your citizens, it says something about your priorities.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But and that's a case you could make. But what you can't argue is that a program that generous can be applied to, say, 50 million or 100 million new people, poor people coming in. So if you say to the rest of the world, hey, we're giving away free medical care to anybody who's within our borders right now, and we're not enforcing our borders, which is basically where we are right now.
See, I think that's the problem I would have with that argument. There's nothing to say that we're not enforcing our borders. Being against the wall, which would only take care of a third of our illegal immigration, does not mean you don't want to support our borders.
We have over 20 million people living here now illegally. So if you, they got here a bunch of different ways. Some overstayed visas, some came across the border.
The majority of them are people overstaying their visas.
But the bottom line is you got over 20 million of them. And so it's clearly pretty easy to get into the country illegally by whatever means. And Democrats don't want to make it harder, but they also want to offer.
That's the issue. They absolutely want to make it harder.
Really? By doing what?
But all of the Democrats have talked about it. They have absolutely. Just saying you don't want to spend $6 billion on a wall doesn't mean you don't want to.
Look, they've talked about increasing. Pending right now that has the Democratic bill in the House and the Senate. We know, we covered it last week, has no new funding or ideas for restricting immigration into the country.
But it does.
How does the math work?
But to say that it has no new funding is different than saying that it doesn't have any funding.
Now,
it has
but
it has billions of dollars of funding. And Democrats have talked about ways of doing surveillance and things like that to actually take care of our illegal immigration problem.
So will you just acknowledge that this is a problem? If you're saying, because we have the internet now, so like the rest of the world sort of knows what your policies
what we're doing, right?
And if you're saying to the rest of the world, we welcome you, which is what Democrats have said explicitly, we welcome you, the Statue of Liberty commands us to welcome you.
Reagan gave them amnesty, so I don't think it was just Democrats. I don't think it was just Democrats. I can't remember a Democrat giving out amnesty.
And as long as you're here, legal or not, we're going to give you free health care then, which is what Gavin Newsom and Bill de Blasio, biggest state, biggest city, just announced this.
But in California, what they're doing is they're giving health care to illegal immigrants that are up to 26. It's not just blanket illegal immigrants.
Just saying, do you see the incentive that you're creating?
Of course I see the incentive,
but can we really afford this? And the answer is it's freaking insane.
Right, but I see the incentive. I would just say that we are the only industrialized nation in the world that does not offer universal health care.
But the question is I get it. I get it.
They all
I'm not
have
arguing,
illegal immigrants.
But
all
I'm
of
not.
them.
No, not on the scale that we do. I'm not aware of any industrialized country that has over 20 million people within its borders illegally and is asking for more.
Are we just uniquely incapable of providing universal health care? Is that what it is?
To the world?
Not to the world.
Yes,
to the Kamala
world.
Harris is advocating for health care for Americans.
No,
that's what she said.
She's not.
She said
That's
that
not
repeatedly.
True. She has said that universal health care should apply to people here illegally.
Medicare for all is health care for Americans. That's what she's advocating.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true.
If we can spend $1 trillion on our military,
if it's just for Americans, maybe you could win me over,
Sure.
but it's not.
Sure.
Mr. Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tammy Bruce is the president of Independent Women's Voice, and she joins us tonight. So, Tammy, that is, I don't think anyone has explored this basic tension. You have two ideas on a collision course with each other. Open borders, welfare state. You can have one, you can have the other. You cannot have them both.
Right. And we've already seen, and when we think about what the Democrats are planning to do, we've seen this in California with Governor Gavin Newsom announcing that they already had Obamacare open for illegal aliens. And then he announced that it would apply to everyone in the state, regardless of whether you were there legally or not. And then, of course, the mayor of New York doing the same thing, making the same proposal. That one would stretch out over and apply effectively to 2021 and apply to everyone, of course, conveniently just after the 2020 election. So they're campaigning on this. It's a big campaign dynamic, but it's California and New York saying exactly the same thing, that there should be universal health care and it should apply to whoever is in our borders. Now, that is impossible. And you can look at, we can use historically, not just Venezuela, but you can look at even a controlled socialist framework like this destroys civilizations. It destroys cultures. It destroys countries. And it does so because it's unsustainable. And yet the left has nothing else to offer. So what they do is they promise free things. They print up more money. You've got, like in Venezuela, I think the inflation rate at this point is 80,000%, and it's unsustainable. So when Kamala Harris says this, and she said it in that clip that it's a human right. Now, when you're saying that, this then presumes that that the supply of it, the presenting of health care, if it's a human right, then it means if you choose to not give people that health care as a doctor, right, as an individual, you then are violating those people's human rights. So it comes down into quite a totalitarian framework about what the government is going to tell people to do and what it says they deserve.
Well, so if you're a Democratic candidate, why wouldn't you just say, I want to be as generous as we can with our people, with American citizens. They come first. And I've got all kinds of pie in the sky, crazy socialist ideas, but I'm going to focus them just on Americans. Why wouldn't they do that?
Well, because part of it, of course, is this notion of already who is here. They imagine those individuals eventually voting. They want to encourage the influx in. Part of that is because, of course, it's political. You've got the number of people who are in the House of Representatives are based on the population of the state. So the more people that move in, whether they be citizens or not, equates to maybe more members of the House of Representatives. So it has a number of fronts to it, but it appeals to the far left part of the base. And so it's about the politics, abandoning any kind of normal sensibility for the American people. But most of all, what I don't like the most, Tucker, is that they're lying to people about what's possible.
Lying. That's exactly right.
And what the end result will be. And that is what all of us should reject.
You're exactly right. Tammy Bruce, great to see you.
Sure.